Well, greetings, everyone. I want to take a little bit of time to address questions. There have been some great questions coming in from my original presidential update. Today, Linda asks, how can we create world peace? I thought it'd be fun to start with a big and bold one and try to do it in 7 minutes or so. So world peace, first of all, I think it's important that we hold in our consciousness that we are capable of creating world peace, because if we cannot envision something, we cannot create it. So I believe it's important for all of us to, first of all, open to the possibility that in our lifetimes we could and can create world peace. And then we think about how. So when I think about how, I think about change from the individual level all the way to the international level, or as our director of peace likes to say, from inner to international. And so we need to have a whole series of structures and systemic shifts that allow that to happen. So I'll talk about a few key ones. So first of all, part of where we're really out of balance as a world is between the masculine and feminine. We have more masculine consciousness driving the power structures, and masculine consciousness by itself will tend towards more competitive paradigms. It's a little bit hardwired into the DNA of masculine psychology, if you will. So we need to bring 50% representation of women at all levels of decision making. That means political structures. It also means business structures, because when you shift to 50% women, that shifts the culture to more balance between the more competitive and the more collaborative energies, and therefore leads us to away from the more exaggerated form of competition, which is really war. So that's part of the equation, is like uplifting a lot more women into political office and into decision-making roles at all levels of businesses and larger structures. So that's a key ingredient. Another key ingredient is to really address these hot spots where there's been collapsed societies or a history of war or trauma, because wherever there's trauma, it will tend to get enacted in violence at some point. So these areas that fester in the world, we need to address those, and not just with economic development, but also psychological approaches. So we really work with healing trauma and reconciliation processes. So these pools of, in a way, collected suffering are addressed, and we can do that. I think it's also important on the entrepreneurial level. I like to work with Kiva.org and give micro loans to people in places like Pakistan or Iraq or the West Bank, where there's been a lot of economic disadvantagement as well as the legacy of trauma. So if we're working on both the psychological with a kind of like a Peace Corps trauma release kind of approach, and also on the economic development and creating more opportunities, that helps to address these global hotspots. Another key ingredient to creating world peace is going to be the shift in our education systems. We're very focused on our intellectual education. We tend to undervalue the social and emotional intelligence, which allows people to navigate uncomfortable emotions, with conflict with other people, to reduce bullying. So one approach is really to create the best practices, aggregate them together, and say, how can we create schools of love that where students emerge by the time they're 18 really knowing how to be loving human beings and navigate conflict, navigate diversity in a way that really creates a different foundation. So I see this as something we can prototype, study, and then scale to a planetary level, so that you're really raising a next generation in a new way. So we have to we've got to work with prison systems, moving away from punitive measures to control behavior to more restorative justice, and really working with the healing that's required, because anytime that we're reinforcing the violence patterns, that's going to kind of spread out into the society. Finally, I think we need to have a network of people who take this on very much like we've done with diseases. So like polio is almost eradicated now on the planet, partially because it's been a grassroots effort that includes scientists, business leaders, all sorts of different initiatives. The Rotary International took this on as their big project to eradicate polio, and there's a whole faction in Rotary that's now thinking peace can be the next priority. There's going to be a major conference in 2020. So I could see this happening by clusters of people around the world addressing a very systemic approach, looking at the roots of violence in community. We're propagating more practices for inner peace, and also looking at the systemic rebalancing of society, and which also includes really addressing the economic injustices and places where there's real suffering, with greater focus on empowerment. So over time, I would see shifting the 40% of our national budget from military expenditures to reducing that percentage, 1% a year, and redirecting that to things that are focused on both economic empowerment and also, which can be micro funds, and also some of the different kinds of healing work that really build bridges to areas that have been challenged in the world. So I think if we approach it more like we did with polio, it's like it was a big thing to how can we eradicate polio from the world, but we've almost made it happen. And the roots of violence are similar. There's a kind of contagion effect. So if we're addressing the hot spots and building capacities at a new level, and then also rebalancing our collective decision making to include more of the masculine-feminine balance, which I think is a key ingredient, I believe that we can, within the next few decades, really plausibly make a pathway forward to create a world at peace. So those are a few parts of the ingredients. There's obviously a lot more. And it ultimately begins in each of our own consciousness. So can we each become an ambassador of peace in how we deal with our conflicts, with other people, with how we navigate our communities, and that we are championing that we're eradicating violence at the roots so that we can truly create a planet that is a reflection of the best in us. So not a comprehensive answer, but those are some of the key ingredients that I see. It's part of why we've created the Summer of Peace every year as an annual offering. We are working with peace builders around the world. We created the World Peace Library as the largest online offering, and really seeing that this is a key part. And so one of the parts of the 2020 vision that I've been articulating is that on September 21st, 2020, the International Day of Peace, that we have a collective global commitment to creating world peace, and that as part of that we would really look to have 2020 and 2021 from that date forward be like a year of peace, that we're really creating a new template, because once people have a more peaceful world, they like it, and so then they're more invested. And we're no longer being pushed by our past, and our history is not our destiny. That we really see our destiny is to figure out how to create a planet at peace, and that we are all part of doing that in individual ways and collective ways. So that's my answer. Thanks, Linda.